Good afternoon, everybody, on the first day of our webinars for Professional Care Workers Week 2025. It's Monday, 15th of September, and this is the second webinar of the day and of the week. I am very pleased that we have a great panel of experts in the sector with us today. So we've got Nathan Jones from National Care Forum. We're hoping for Nadra Ahmed from National Care Association to join us any minute. We have some technical difficulties there. We have Martin Green from Care England, Jane Townsend from Home Care Association, Kirsty Simmons from Connect to Care, who are also the sponsors of the session today. So thank you very much, Kirsty, for sponsoring. And we're hoping that Clementina, a care worker, will join us as well. Again, some technical difficulties there. So fingers crossed that Clementina and Nadra can join us any minute. Right. First of all, is there anything with the recent happenings in the world or in the sector that anybody on the panel would like to talk about before we get into the questions?
I'm happy to jump in on that one, Carolina. Yeah. I think, as probably most people attending this call have kind of been following over the past couple of weeks, there's been a little bit of reshuffling and political chaos in the government, which has left us thinking kind of what is going to happen to the adult social care kind of agenda in government, and sort of starting to think about that. So primarily thinking about the resignation of Angela Rayner, who was driving quite a lot of the policy around the Fair Pay Agreement for care workers, Employment Rights Bill, and kind of that social justice angle, to ensuring that reforms are brought in place for adult social care to benefit care workers and ultimately people drawing upon care and support. So if you look at any kind of news outlet over the past week or two, you'll see lots of speculation about are those measures going to be watered down? Are they not going to be watered down? The government's saying they won't be. So there's basically a swirl of uncertainty about kind of what's happening at the moment. We kind of have to proceed with the assumption that the government is going to push ahead and is going to bring forward these reforms, but we can probably get into that a little bit. I'm sure there's other things people have spotted as well.
Thanks a lot, Nathan. Anybody else on the call? Jane?
Yeah, just to enforce what Nathan just said, I think the unions are putting significant pressure on the government and to provide over 60% of the funding for the Labour Party, which is apparently having some financial difficulties. So Keir Starmer will be caught between business on the one hand that are putting a lot of pressure on, and seeing the appointment of Peter Kyle as the new Business and Trade Secretary, which I think is good news. Peter Kyle is the only cabinet minister, as far as I can work out, that's ever actually run a business. As a constituency MP, he's been extremely supportive of some of our members, even though he's a cabinet secretary. So, but there will be pressure from business to water down some of the measures, and Keir Starmer will be trying to balance that in an environment of extreme pressure on his own leadership.
Thank you, Jane. Martin?
Thanks, Carolina. I think the issue for me is that social care has been a low priority for this government since it arrived in Downing Street. And what we have to do is make sure that it becomes a much higher priority. I think also the challenge for us is to make sure that when the government has a raft of support for the workforce, they need to realise that as the biggest customer, they have got to pay for it. And the sector is reeling from the issues around the national insurance hike, and the amounts of money that has taken out of the sector is significant. And if we're going to have the new Employment Rights Bill, it has to be funded. And if it's not funded, it will lead to lots of people not having enhanced employment rights. It leads to lots of people being made redundant and lots of people who use care and support not having the support they need. So I think there are some big issues which the government need to address.
Yeah, so just coming in on the back of that, I think there is a risk, which we've highlighted all along, of just an increase in non-compliance, an increase potentially in the number of workers either being told they are or declaring themselves that they're self-employed, therefore having fewer employment rights than before. Louise Casey, by all accounts, has a hotline to number 10. There have been rumours about her being lined up for some other role in Keir Starmer's operation. So quite how much time she's expending on this social care review remains to be seen. She's certainly been relatively invisible so far to all concerned, although it was good news that they had a cross-party meeting. Was it beginning of last week, I think?
Yeah, it was last Monday, I think. And from what we can see, I mean, there's not much details coming out about the substance of what was talked about during that, but it looks like there were at least spokespeople from all of the major parties, including Reform, at that, which is quite interesting. So yeah, we'll kind of see if that's repeated and whether we'll start to see more visibility from Baroness Casey in the coming weeks and months.
And I think also the issue about political consensus, everybody talks about trying to get a political consensus. Well, in my view, there is one. Every single party just wants to kick this issue down the road. None of them want to address the issue and deliver some long-term policy. So I think all party talks are all very well, but what Louise Casey needs to do is get to grips with the substantive nature of the commission and come out, first of all, with her short-term recommendations, but then also make sure that she's co-producing her long-term strategy with people who use care and support and the people who deliver it. And unless she engages with those two big constituencies effectively, she'll be like every other commission. She'll come up with something which governments will then just ignore.
Absolutely. From my point of view, if I can just come in there, I think echoing a lot of what's been said in terms of political chaos, and it's political chaos on the back of historic political chaos, you know. So at some point, it's who's going to take accountability and responsibility for this, and there has to be that political will in the background. And I think this is going to come from the sector driving that political will. We just need to keep that pressure on. But somebody needs to be responsible and accountable for it. And I would love to see more employer voices being referred to and referenced within all that, because it seems we're still in that loop of what happens to social care is kind of done to, not with. And that's the bit that I would like the government to focus on as well. Take us on that journey with you.
Thanks a lot. And thank you for that overview. I think that's very helpful, especially that we are looking to talk about the future of adult social care, which seems to forever remain under a big question mark and I would say lack of decision making. So with that in mind and the future in mind, can you talk to me about how do you think we can design care services to place autonomy, dignity, and personalized outcomes at the center of it? Both for people who draw on care and also care workers. Who would like to start?
Well, Carolina, I'm happy to jump in there. I think, first of all, we've got to co-produce services with people who use them. And one of the challenges in the current system is that often people who use services are not engaged in deciding what will make a difference to their lives. And all too often, the delivery of services happens when people are in a crisis. And so we've got to start downstreaming the support to a preventative service rather than always being a crisis orientated one. And we should start by asking people what will make a difference to their lives. Rather than saying, this is what we're going to assess you need, let's start by saying, how can we help you to live well? What support will make the difference to you and to the people who love you and support you? And when we start from that premise, we'll be much nearer to services that meet people's needs, that respect their autonomy, that deliver choice. And I think the other issue is that we don't spend enough time asking people what they want to trade off, what makes a difference to them. And so if we start from the premise of saying, well, we can't have everything, but what will be the things that can make a difference in your life, and let those people who use services define them, we'll then be on a much happier trajectory to delivering the outcomes they require. I also think that it will really help the staff who deliver care and support, because they'll be working with the person they support rather than against them. So I think for me, it's all about how we co-produce.
Thank you, Martin. That's very helpful. Nadra, are you with us? Can we test if we can hear you? Can't hear you. Can't see you, can't hear you. Right, we've got your camera sorted. Have a go at that microphone now, and then I'll give you all the time in the world to talk when you're sorted. Right, who else had their hand up? Nathan and then Jane.
Thanks. And just coming off the back of kind of what Martin said, completely agree. Co-production, having people
Hear me
involved.
now?
Yay.
Yes, we have Nadra as well, which is good. So yes, jumping in the back of what Martin was saying. So I think that whole co-production piece and how we do it is very important, both in terms of providers in the sector actually thinking about what the needs of people are in communities and designing services that are new and innovative to actually address those. And that will require listening and working with people. It'll also involve co-production with the care workforce as well, understanding their skills, the careers that they want that can be part of that. But I think in all of this is kind of the strategic level is kind of often missing. Is what is commission and procurement look like in local areas? How is the NHS, how are local authorities designing how they're commissioning? Are they listening to people? Are they listening to care workers? Or are they just looking at the bottom lines because of the pressures of local government? So there's a whole piece here about how we have our commissioners strategically thinking in really innovative and new ways and working in partnership with providers rather than seeing them as kind of some sort of command and control type structure where we say you do this very rigid definition of residential care or this very rigid definition of something over here. Because otherwise we're just not going to end up with good careers for people or good services.
Thanks a lot, Nathan. And over to Jane, just a reminder of the question: how can we design care services to place autonomy, dignity, and personalized outcomes at the center for both people who draw on care and care workers? Jane, over to you.
Thank you. I think one of the issues that we urgently need to solve is the variation across the country and what's available for people. And I mean, none of this is going to be possible without the country deciding to invest, but the blockage seems to be the Treasury on that one. But I've said before that in Australia, they have a national assessment tool that is used everywhere, and they will be moving from about 4 levels of defined levels of need to 8 levels. And if you're defined at level 8 or whatever, wherever you live in the country, the same public subsidy is assigned to you. So it isn't a postcode lottery. And then citizens are sort of, the money is kind of earmarked to them. They don't physically get hold of it, but they can then actually choose, a bit like self-funders do here. And I think I'm sort of a bit torn between that idea of having a completely free market in that sense and the need, as Nathan said, for a more strategic approach to market shaping, particularly if we're going to do neighbourhood health effectively. At present, the areas where it works well, they've got, you know, 1 home care provider, maybe 2 per neighbourhood, and those providers can be part of the multidisciplinary neighbourhood team. In places where you've got 300 providers all randomly bidding for work at the lowest rate, it's almost impossible to make that happen. And also areas which are encouraging a lot of self-employed, unregulated care workers, how's that going to fit with joining up care, digitisation, working in neighbourhood teams? So I think the strategy is really key here as well. And certainly in home care, the commissioning is at the root of it.
Thank you, Jane. Kirsty or Nadra, anything you'd like to add in here?
I'm going to bow to Nadra. She's got her speakers working and I'm sure she's got lots to say, so I'm not going to
Well, that's very kind of you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, excellent, excellent. My sincere apologies. I'm just looking at the question and obviously agree with colleagues that have already spoken. I've been dipping in and out of the conversations that were going on. But I suppose for me, one of the things is to recognise just how far we've already come in social care, how much we do deliver personalised care. We do our very best to deliver care that is dignified and respect the privacy of individuals. And so that is something that we have consistently grown, and it's evolved over the time. So I think for me, personalisation is already there in a really a strong format. I think when we start to look at how redesigning, I think let's talk about redesigning systems, which is the way that social care is perceived, the image of it, the way it's funded. All of those things are what really causes us the biggest headache. The actual delivery of social care and the workforce has evolved. You know, when those of us who've been around for a long time, we did not give that sort of personalised care that we're giving now. We did not have the residents that we have today. We have grown into making sure that we deliver it. And for me, that is the professionalisation of our sector. That's the way that we work really well. We're enabling people, workforce, to go into people's homes and deliver safe care. That's another piece that we know that we're doing. We didn't do that before. That domiciliary care market wasn't there. So we've learned so much, we've moved so much. And I think we've got to stop beating ourselves up about what we don't do or what doesn't get done. Just let's recognize what does get done. Let's be very clear about that and then develop that, but recognize that it's the systems. It's the systems that are failing us, and that's what my colleagues already have alluded to, and I bow to their superior judgment on that. I think that is most, you know, that's absolutely where it is. I heard Martin talk very early on when I was dipping in and out about, you know, the changes in government and all, you know, all of this is uncertainty, it's systems uncertainty, it's local authorities consistently telling us that they can't deliver because they're not funded. But let's not make that about social care and the work that we do. Let's make that about the systems. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Nadra. Kirsty, did you have anything?
Yeah, couldn't agree more with everything everybody said on the call already. I think one of the things, looking at it, if you were going to take a helicopter view of health and social care, I think Nadra's hit the nail on the head that what comes from within that value-based role that people are playing and how they co-produce is A1. People are doing that already fantastically on a shoestring. So imagine, should the political will change and people invest in that and see it for what it is, and that strategy, the strategy piece in the background, it could make and revolutionize one of the biggest employers that we've got in this country. I am worried about things like almost this race to the bottom procurement system where we will do A, B, and C, but we'll do it on the cheap. That worries me. However, when we look at social care as a whole, there is so much good, so much positivity, so much diversity, so much championing that I think we need to start looking outward now, because I think that's where the work needs to be done. You know, we've all looked internally, we've done a lot of work. Let's start putting the pressure on the people that can make those decisions.
Thank you. And Nathan?
Yeah, thank you. And kind of coming back in on that very last point about putting the pressure on the people who can make the decisions. Obviously, we've got all the stuff my various colleagues in this call and others are doing to put pressure on politicians of all political parties to actually make this a priority. But kind of thinking back to that kind of local government strategic level, the sort of governance you get in local areas, I think we've got a real opportunity over the next couple of years actually to try and embed representation of both providers, care workers, and people drawing upon care and support more closely. So there's various big kind of policy shifts happening in terms of reorganizing the way local government works and creating a new strategic tier to that, as well as a sort of restructuring of the way the integrated care board geographies work. So there's fewer of them, and they kind of got higher strategic oversight over larger geographical areas, and those are kind of being aligned with that local authority sort of strategic level reorganizing. At the moment, social care isn't being talked about at that as being part of that higher strategic level, but really we ought to be pushing for the voices of everybody involved in adult social care to be involved there, because that's another pressure point and something that would perhaps allow us to start really influencing that commissioning and procurement practice, and it's important for us to be pushing for that.
Thank you, Nathan. Nadra.
Yeah, just to kind of widen the point that Nathan's just made, which I think is really important. It's about that commissioning piece, but it's interesting that Nathan says, you know, so that there are these systems being set up and they're being talked about. So the 10-year plan, the NHS 10-year plan, I mean, interestingly enough, everything it says in there, everything it says about the neighbourhood health, all of those things is going to be reliant on social care. And yet we get three mentions in it, you know. So it's raising the bar and saying, well, actually, you know, you didn't tell us that social care would be doing that. How's that going to be funded? How are you going to support us to fund it? Because part of our problem has always been that we are done unto, and you know, having been a provider, and I know others here who have been as well, we kind of want to make things happen when we're asked to. And so we accept it all the time, and we professionalize our staff to deliver that. But that's that's fine, but then it's done unto us, and it's about just standing up and saying we'd love to deliver that, but actually this is the challenge that we will face, and how can we overcome that challenge, because we owe it to our workforce and we owe it to the people that we support.
Thank you, Nadra and Martin, and then we'll move on to the next question.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, Nadra. And I think one of the things we've got to do, though, as a sector is not always say, how can we do it? But sometimes say, we're not going to do it unless you give us the right support and the right amount of resources. And I think all too often what social care does do, because we are so committed to delivering outcomes for the people we support, we always make sure we can do whatever is asked of us. Now, interestingly, GPs don't do that. GPs spend their life telling the government that if they want to move 1 millimeter to the left, they've got to be bribed to do it. And I think we need to be much more assertive in how we say the things we will do, but also the bottom lines on which we will not move unless we're properly supported to be able to deliver more and more, often with less and less.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, everybody. And now I'd like to move to focus on the workforce. Obviously, this is Professional Care Workers Week, and looking into the future. Could you tell me how we can build the future where care work is universally recognized as a skilled, respected, and aspirational profession? So no more just a care worker. Jane.
Thank you. I think in other sectors, when work has changed from being viewed as sort of, you know, low paid to more professional, it has been associated with an improvement in employment conditions. So I do think the government's on the right track trying to make that happen. The concern we see is that they haven't necessarily understood the root causes of it, certainly in our part of the sector. And until we see a change in how markets are shaped and commissioning is done in home care, it's going to be difficult to provide better jobs. And we think it's not the headline pay rate is a bit of a distraction. It's more the security of income that is important, knowing that you're going to earn a certain amount each week. You know when you've got to work, not being told that you've got to be available from 7 in the morning till 10 o'clock at night, 7 days a week, and you don't know when you're going to be working. No one can function in that kind of arrangement. So I think in some places, it has been possible to offer in-home care money for shifts, not just for per minute or per hour. In care homes, that's always been easier because you go there and do a shift. But in the places where that's happened, it's been really positive for the care workers, and also them being included as part of the multidisciplinary teams with the health professionals. That gives them that respect, the recognition that they are the eyes and ears of the health and care system. They are the ones seeing people more often than anyone. So I think it's a combination of things, you know, that the employment contracts are part of it and an important part, but it's I think that involvement and that being treated as part of a multidisciplinary team. And we've got a great opportunity coming up with these neighbourhood teams. It's just now a case of making sure that, as Nadra said, that social care is a key part, and Nathan, you know, a key part of the thinking as we develop those teams.
Thank you, Jane. I've got Nathan next.
Yeah, and I totally agree with what Jane said. Like employment conditions, pay terms and conditions, you know, across all types of adult social care are going to be really important. I think accompanying that, we need to see that professional recognition. So we, you know, at NCF, we would be arguing that we do need a some sort of professional body, like one of the Royal Colleges, to actually give a voice to care workers, and ensure that that prestige that comes with it is actually in the main conversations and can go toe to toe with NHS colleagues. I think accompanying that, you need some form of some sort of professional registration as well. And I think there's a whole lot of things you can do with that on its own. It's not enough. I think it has to come with all the other jigsaw pieces together. And then I think kind of the wider point I'd like to make as well is about upskilling and training and specialisms and career development. I mean, anybody who works in any sector, in any discipline, wants to feel that they're improving their skills, improving what they're doing, and have a really clear kind of various different career paths that they could follow. How do we ensure that we invest in that? How do we ensure that we are adopting new types of technology and innovations that might change the way certain jobs work? Some work that we are doing at the moment is thinking about what a care technologist role might look like, where you might have a care worker with specialist skills to help somebody navigate care tech, understand what types of technology could be appropriate for their individual circumstances, and have that as a key part of their care planning. So I think there are future disciplines and future kind of types of care role that we need to be investing in and allowing to develop. So as people have a very different idea of what care work is, and it becomes much more attractive to wider population as well as a really meaningful skill career.
Thanks a lot, Nathan. Can I just ask that if you're not speaking, please mute yourself. I'll go to Martin next, but before that, just wanted to flag up that we have Q&A open, and 3 questions have been posted so far. So if I can ask our lovely panelists if you feel like answering any of those questions, because we may not have time to go around to them at the end, that would be helpful. Yeah, if you go to Q&A at the bottom of your screen, you should be able to go in and type your answer as well. Right, Martin.
Thanks. I would agree with what everybody had said about the workforce and how we need to professionalise it. But I also think it would be really helpful if the government actually showed some commitment. We have got workforce strategies all over the place in the NHS, but they have never endorsed the workforce strategy for social care. I think we should also acknowledge that the NHS spends £100,000 a minute on training, resources that are not available to social care. Well, in an integrated system, they would be available to social care. So we've got to have a proper workforce strategy. We need clear skills and competency frameworks. We need career escalators. We also need to look at the quality of work in terms of the fact that we're in a different era now. So people want more flexibility in the workforce, and what the workforce need is a better quality of work. So we need to apply ourselves to how that is going to be delivered. And we also need to recognise, and the points that Nathan made about technology were really important points, because if we look at the demographics and if we look at the numbers of people we're going to need, we're never going to achieve that. So we've got to start thinking differently about how we work and how we embrace technology to deliver outcomes, autonomy, choice and control for people who use services, but also a better quality of work for those who deliver them. So I think we need a comprehensive approach, has to be backed by the government, and it has to be properly resourced. And there needs to be much more read across on the money available to the NHS, and to say, actually, this isn't about the NHS, it's about people who use services. So that money should be available to train staff in whatever sector they work, if they're going to be delivering outcomes for the people who use services.
Thank you very much, Martin. And Kirsty, please.
Thank you. I think Martin's just covered some of what I wanted to say there. But from a skills point of view, we do have a very siloed approach still, and we've got care workforce pathways out there that have been quite new in the last sort of 18 months, but they're still perceived by employers and you know, providers as quite woolly, not specific, very generalized, and I don't think that helps professionalising the sector. And if you were to take the NHS and the health and social care sector, and to coin Nadra, I do apologise, I know you're coming up next, but social care is one of the biggest tools you've got to fix the NHS, yet we're seen as a very different entity, the poor relation still. And if we think of those, and not just parity of esteem, but actually how health and social care do a very NHS task orientated job, we do that as a personal care. So we change what needs to be done in ABC and make sure that it fits that person to the T. Then if we work together and there really is this integrated system, then there should be that integrated funding. And that's one of the ways that we are going to be able to professionalise this sector completely. And this might go towards what Destiny's put in the chat in terms of what are the plans for professionalism of care. And I don't think there is a set plan. People have ideas, but nobody's talking to the other person of their ideas. And one thing that we all know in business, you know, the lack of strategy, or just eat your culture for breakfast. Nobody's having those higher level conversations. And I think that's where a lot of people on this call can come in. And I work with a range of employers as part of the Trailblazer Group, as one of the leads. And from Destiny's point of view, there is a huge recognition from the sector that we understand as clinical duties as part of health and social care. We understand that they're not seen as the same level as a clinical duty because you've removed it from a ward into somebody's own home, instead of seeing that actually that's quite a difficult task to do. That makes it harder to do, and you need more specialist training to be able to do that. But there seems to, we're on almost a 3 to 5 year lag of the government, or whichever flavour of government or department. They're not quite catching up with us, but I think the voices are getting louder. So I think there's hope, but we're not quite there yet.
Thank you, Kirsty. And delegated health tasks is something we're going to be discussing later in the week, more in depth as well. And Nadra?
Thank you. So my kind of thinking around this is that professionalisation doesn't just happen overnight. There is a period of time that it needs to grow from. And I think we've been talking about this for such a long time. I mean, Skills for Care has been around for, I can't remember, 20 years maybe. I was involved with it at the very beginning. And at that time around the table, we were talking about it. We talked about care ambassadors. We talked about all of those things. For me, that professionalisation piece starts in schools when we start talking about social care as a career. Until we get that into the mind's eye of individuals, I think that, you know, if you talk, only last week I was with somebody and she said, oh, I'm just a care worker, and I kind of stopped her there. So why are people still saying that? Because we're talking about the professionalisation and how do we move that forward? Why do our workforce feel that they still need to be saying, oh, I'm just a care worker, when actually what they do is when somebody is fixed in hospital with whatever acute condition they have, their recovery begins when they're either back in their own home with the care worker or in a care setting. That's when recovery starts. So that acute bit is set, and sometimes it can be quite detrimental, especially to mental health. And we know that, but it's social care that picks it up, and we're the ones that kind of move with it. And I think for me, as somebody who's been in the sector now for nearly 45 years, I think what's interesting is my children, my grandchildren know what social care is. They know what it is, but their friends at school don't have a clue. And we haven't kind of broadened it to people finding out. The role of someone, you know, the Care Workers Charity, it's a really important role. The role of Skills for Care, these are important roles to talk about professionalisation. It's not just a word, it also comes with responsibility. And so that responsibility will come with making sure that it's funded properly. It'll come with making sure that the pay scales are right. And that the recognition of that, the qualification agenda is there for people, that they don't feel insecure that they're undertaking tasks that maybe they don't feel fully qualified for, because that will all be there already. So I think that the bigger picture for me on this is the workforce strategy and how it's adopted, but that curriculum needs to be right, it needs to be done, and it needs to be working. And it will take, as Kirsty said, you know, 3 to 5 years. It could be longer. But if we don't start it in schools, that children that are coming through and going into secondary schools start thinking, actually, that's a career that I might want to follow. Until we start doing that, we can't just do it from here. It's not from this moment. It's got to be a building up.
Thank you, Nadra. And I really wished that last year when my daughter came back from school after Florence Nightingale workshop in year 1, that there would be one for social care for care workers, because they're learning about a lot of things in early primary. And I think that, like you say, that would be the time to introduce it to very young kids, get it in their mind then that it is something that is incredibly rewarding, and you can have a career in it, and you should be proud for doing it. Nathan.
Thanks, Carolina. And this might be preempting perhaps one of the questions coming up, but I just want to have a stab at what Happiness has put in the Q&A as well, because I think a lot of this really does relate both to kind of what we're doing in the future that's innovative and different, but also the kind of skills and talents of our workforce being harnessed properly and being recognised as well. So I think, you know, a large part of the problem we've got at the moment is a lot of the government's policies and strategies towards social care is very geared in terms of how do we discharge people from hospital as quickly as possible. And yes, there's some elements about, you know, it's better for recovery and whatever else is part of that. But that emphasis doesn't quite get to the whole preventative piece that, you know, our social care workforce is well placed to be doing. You know, there are lots of things that perhaps now happen in hospitals or happen in acute settings that could happen in the community. They could happen well before somebody ends up in hospital. And that goes for you know, people of all ages. And kind of how do we get the recognition from policymakers and government that the kind of skills and values and commitments of our workforce, and the fact that they kind of form, I guess, what you could call like a, you know, across all the different types of services being provided, an ecosystem of care and support in people's communities, in their localities. How do we get to the point where people can draw upon the care and support they need when and where they need it, rather than it kind of being always measured in terms of how many people have been discharged from hospital? Sorry, that's a bit garbled, but I just think there's something about the value and skills of our workforce actually being recognised at a much earlier point in the whole health and care journey.
No, thank you very much, Nathan. And that was very interesting. And thank you, everybody, for trying to answer questions in the chat as well. I appreciate it. Martin?
Thanks, Carolina. I think I want to also make the point that there is a focus often around discharge and how social care can help the NHS with discharge. But I think we should also acknowledge that sometimes people are discharged in a worse state than they were when they came in because of the failures of the NHS. So I've seen people, for example, who have been in hospital and have never left their bed for a period of 12 weeks. So they then, when they return, cannot walk, cannot do all the things they could when they went in. So I think we should also make sure that when people talk about the link between social care and discharge, we remind people that the discharge process should also be started and continued in terms of rehab in hospitals. And we need hospitals to take their part as well as social care. And often what happens is people then criticize social care, but nobody acknowledges that sometimes the problems have been exacerbated by a hospital stay.
Thank you, Martin. And when I was a care worker, that was definitely my experience. And I think it was particularly difficult in home care when somebody I supported went to the hospital and the care from my side like terminated. And there are many times when we're like trying to coordinate hospitals to continue visits. A couple of times we managed that, but that is very difficult when that stops and then it's hospital and then that stops and you come out again. Jane?
Thank you. I think one of the questions was about policy and how that will make this happen. In theory, the government's 10-year health plan is quite encouraging in the sense that they recognise these 3 shifts from hospital to community, illness to prevention, analogue to digital. I think when you read the plan, for my money anyway, the prevention section is a bit too high-tech focused. You know, it's going on about genomics and digitization, and of course that's important, but what we see on the ground is, in a way, basic things that are important for people, you know, having adequate housing, having enough money to live on, having friends or social connection, and social care plays a really key role there. And there's also, you know, an awful lot of people that we don't have contact with because they're sort of pre-eligibility. And I think that's where the technology solutions may help us to extend our reach, if you like, because I was quite struck in the pandemic. I was on a call once when there was a director of adult social services from quite a large council saying that at the time he had 20,000 people on his books in receipt of adult social care. But then somebody came along and said that there were another 50,000 people on the shielding list or the, you know, clinically extremely vulnerable list. And, you know, could he keep an eye on them? Well, those 50,000, you know, that equivalent group are the sort of target of the neighbourhood health concept. So the idea that you use data, probably from mostly GP systems, to identify people at risk. They're going to start with people with multiple long-term conditions and try to support in a way that prevents deterioration. And that doesn't necessarily mean providing care in the way that we would necessarily understand it. It could be connecting people with their local community groups and you know, encouraging, it could be falls prevention technologies and things like that. Some councils have already made really good progress in that area. They announced last week, was it last week, Nathan, about 43 neighbourhoods that are going to...
it was end of last week.
Yeah, last week, yeah. 43 neighbourhoods. Neighbourhoods are population groups of somewhere between 30,000 and 50,000 people. 43 neighbourhoods across the country that are going to be taking part in a pilot or the first wave. So I think it will be important to look at those and see whether you are in any of those areas and as providers and what you could offer to help them with their work, because frankly, unless social care providers start to get a little bit pushy themselves, they probably won't get invited in necessarily. You could try going through the council if you already have a relationship with them, but I think the action is going to be at those local levels, as Nathan said earlier. And you know, Martin, you talked about the GPs. That the thing about the GPs is that they do tend to stick together. Like they don't, like none of them will accept low fee rates, whereas unfortunately in our sector there's always somebody that's willing to pick up work at £17 an hour. So in many ways providers have got themselves to blame for the situation being stuck. You know, we're trying to push on the moral dimension here. You know, how can it be right that councils are buying care at rates that don't even allow payment of the minimum wage, never mind anything else? But yeah, I think there's plenty of opportunities, but I do think we shouldn't forget the very practical, non-sexy things, like making sure people have enough to eat and that they've got a roof over their heads and they've got connection socially.
Thank you, Jane. And from our report earlier this year on wellbeing of care workers, the same, absolutely the same applies to the workforce. You know, different level wellbeing interventions, support groups or therapy, etc. Great. But where people don't have enough food to eat, and the 20% of care workers have to go to a food bank, or they live in digital poverty and they can't pay their bills, and all of that goes on a credit card every month, and that builds up, builds up, builds up. Everything else just goes over people's heads. So it is meeting those basic needs for both people who draw on care and the workforce. I think that's, like you say, we're not there yet. And it's difficult to think anything above that or different to that when we're not meeting the basics. Thank you. Right. Next question I've got is trying to think a bit radical outside of what the official government plans are. If we were to look at the next decade, what radical changes do you think are necessary to make social care sustainable? And obviously not just for people who draw on care, but also for the workforce and people who run care businesses. It has to work for everybody. Martin.
Thanks, Carolina. Well, my radical suggestion would be let's stop thinking about health and social care in silos, and let's use the budget that we have for outcomes. I think one of the things we should acknowledge is that we have got £230 billion in health and about 28 billion in social care. Now, these are astronomical amounts of money. And if you reapportioned that, and if you started thinking about it in terms of the needs of people and the outcomes that are required, rather than thinking, oh, this money's got to go to the NHS. The NHS is an institution, an organisation. It's not an end in itself. And we need to shift the dial and stop thinking organisation and process and start thinking, you know, people and outcomes. And if we did that, I think we would have enough money to sustain a good quality, both health and social care service. But it will require us as well to be really radical in how we think about how we spend the money. And at the moment, we've locked ourselves into a 1948 system, and we're in 2025. So a lot of the stuff that we have got, which is taking vast amounts of money, is actually not fit for purpose anymore. And we've got to have radical approaches to decommissioning as well as commissioning new services. But I'm confident if we looked at this in terms of people and outcomes, we could probably get a good quality health and social care system. We may even be able to remit some money back to the Exchequer.
Thank you, Martin. And Jane, I can see your hand up, but Clementina, after 50 minutes of technical difficulties, has just been able to join us. Clementina, thank you for your perseverance.
Yeah, I had to, it's raining cat and dog over here. I had to drive out of my house to be able to get network. Sorry.
No, thank you very much. So we're talking about the future of social care, obviously on our advisory board and Care Worker Champions board for the Care Workers Charity. Do you want to just tell us what you think care workers need for the future of social care to make it better for the workforce, but also for people who draw on care and the businesses involved?
So I would say to be on the front line as a carer, we have to have the necessary support to be able to care for people. Necessary support in the sense that if we have the basic training that we need and also the right pay that we need to be able to sustain ourselves, because being in the front line and you are having so many difficulties is difficult for you to be in the job. And also the right recognition. I once supported a patient last week, and he said to me, I won't do your job for £100 per hour because it's a crap job. I felt really very bad for him to say that, but I had to tell him that. But if I'm not here to support you, then who would come to support you? Also, they should be polite with their words as well. So yeah, fair pay is what have to be looked into, and the well-being of the carers. Yeah, that's what I'll have to say.
Thank you very much, Clementina. Jane, back to you.
Yeah, I was just going to follow up. I think we have a political problem here, because whenever you ask politicians, why are you not putting money into social care, they say, well, the polls tell us that immigration is the #1 issue, followed by cost of living, followed by health. And therefore, if we pour money into the NHS, people will vote for us. Essentially, that's what they think. I don't know how we overcome that unless somebody finds some political courage from somewhere, because people in general don't want to think about their own morbidity and mortality. Like, no one wants to think that they're going to get old or unwell. And it in other countries, the governments have helped people. It's a bit like the argument over pensions. Like, probably many of us would rather spend the money now than save it for later, but we're really grateful later when we've got our pensions. So I think we need some thinking like that. But in the current fiscal environment, it's going to be so challenging, honestly. There is still this view that, oh, you know, people should look after their own. Well, people already are. You know, there's 6 million people or so supporting family, and not able to contribute to the economy for that reason. So I don't know what the answer is, but it is quite difficult.
Thank you, Jane. I suppose that goes to Rob's question that was in Q&A as well. Should social care be apolitical? Because, like you say, it shouldn't really be about votes, or it should be about votes. How do we make it work? And it is very difficult. Nadra?
Yeah, just following on, I think it is a really challenging question, and the word radical is key in this, because it would have to be radical. For generations now, no, that's not quite right. For decades now, we have heard so many people telling us, eminent people who've run commissions, what needs to happen. What we now need is somebody, as Jane has alluded to, somebody with the courage and the conviction to make some of that change happen. And it would have to be radical, because it would have to be based on the reality of what social care does. I think, coming back from a history background, it's interesting when I studied the poor laws and the way that you know, that the image of the workhouse emerged, and social care for some reason has kind of stayed in this world where it hasn't really been elevated into a profession for all the reasons we've already talked about. But it has always been for those who can't afford to look after themselves almost scenario. And that's not true, actually, because people are spending their own money in order to access social care, quite a lot of their own money. And that, again, is a debate that commissions have had. So I think the change has to be radical, but the only way it could be radical is if we had enough intellect within the decision makers to understand how much you could save, which is what Martin talked about, in a way, how much we could actually save. You're smirking at me, Carolina. We've had this conversation in the past, but it is that, you know, why is it that every politician, and I said this openly in an NHS conference the other day, when the question was asked by an ex Minister of Care, I think we talked about this, and and they asked the question, what do you think should happen? And I said then, and I repeat it now, is that it's really interesting that before they come into power, they all know how to sort social care out because they think it's broken. When they're in power, they get a bit of amnesia and forgot what they thought. And then they come out of politics and then they all know how to do it all over again. But that period when they could do something is a period of gross amnesia, gross incompetence. And that's where we have to kind of, that's where we sit, all of us around this table who are advocating for changes in social care, spend half our lives telling each of them what needs to happen. What needs to happen is also to recognise that people are living longer and with very complex healthcare conditions. That's not recognised, but that falls into social care. You know, so the pensionable age, all of these things will go up. So people work longer, but they're living with complex healthcare conditions. Some of that needs to actually be acknowledged and recognised. And I think maybe Baroness Casey will do some of that. What it will take is, it will take somebody with a huge amount of gut and you know, for us to take our hats off to them to say, well done. I can't see it happening in the very near future, but we have to keep fighting.
Thank you very much, Nadra. And I need to work on my poker face when I find things particularly interesting. I have to say, never had a good poker face. Nathan.
Well, thanks, Caroline. And yes, to get some political will behind some changes would be good. I'm kind of bringing us back to kind of the very first question that Caroline asked us about, you know, designing services that they have autonomy, dignity, personalization at their center. And part of me wonders whether kind of the radicalness that we need, particularly in light of an aging population, in people thankfully living longer with complex needs, is how. So the political debates often get quite caught up on how do we fund this thing, how do we ensure that people don't have to sell their own homes. It gets quite focused on a very narrow political debate, which then derails kind of wider points about how do we actually want social care to function? Should we call it social care? Should we call it something else? What do we want for people who work in care and support? What do we want for the people? What do the people who work in those services want? What do the people who draw upon care and support actually want from the services they get? So is the radical kind of approach, how do we get more from a bottom-up perspective on the policy making and what we design, rather than the kind of default NHS command and control top-down, this is what you say, what I say is what you do. Some of that's half-baked. I'm kind of thinking that through myself. I'm just trying to think, if we're thinking about something really radical, we've got to make sure that it's radical in the right way for the people who actually need to use adult social care and work in it. So I'll just leave it there.
Thank you very much, Nathan. I think a good way to end as well. Thank you very much, everybody, for your time and your expertise. Thank you, everybody who have joined. Thank you very much to Clementina for persevering, joining, and being able to contribute. Thank you for the questions. We tried to answer them in our conversation as much as we could as well, and we'll take them to any future work that we do. Have a lovely afternoon, everybody. And like I mentioned earlier, this video will be available soon on our YouTube channel as well for you all to share. So thank you to Jane, Nadra, Clementina, Martin, Nathan, and Kirsty. And thank you to Connected to Care for sponsoring today. And everybody have a lovely rest of the day. Thank you.